Welcome to a new year and the latest edition of Trunk and Tales as we navigate what is happening in the world of politics. I'm Stacy Smith, and if you're watching or listening to this podcast, I ask that you hit the like or the subscribe button. The 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, died at the age of 100. Coming up, some thoughts about the one-term president. Also, as Jimmy Carter was laid to rest, the second term of Donald Trump is about to begin, and we'll discuss that and what the Democrats might be doing. That's coming up on this edition of Trunk and Tales. And with me to talk about this is my panel of political analysts and experts, and they are the former governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Corbett. Mr. Corbett is a Republican. He also served as the state attorney general and also as the U.S. attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Mr. Corbett teaches law now at Duquesne University. Also joining us is Jim Byrne. Jim is the chairman emeritus of the state Democratic Party in Pennsylvania. Jim also served in city and in county government. And while never abandoning politics, Jim practices law right now. Keith Schmidt, one of our regular Republicans who served as the state director for former Republican Senator Rick Santorum, could not be with us today. He'll join us again on our next episode. But with us is Joe Mystic. Joe's background includes consulting Democrats across the state and serving in city government. Joe also teaches law at Duquesne University, and you can read his thoughts on life and on politics every weekend in the Tribune Review. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me, and I hope that you're all having a great new year so far for 2025. Is it good for you?
Happy New Year, yes.
It's good so far.
Happy New Year. It's good so far in our household.
That's great. That's good. Well, as you know, the 39th and longest living president, Jimmy Carter, died at the age of 100. He lived longer than the previous longest living president, who was John Adams. He died at the age of 90, Jimmy Carter at 100. So let's start with Jim. Your thoughts on not only Mr. Carter's political life, but on Mr. Carter's life in general.
Thank you. Sure. At the time he left office, I don't think he was as appreciated as much as he should have been, but over time he has been. He laid the foundation for the fall of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev has admitted that, or had admitted that. That's one component. He started to build the defense, and President Reagan, took the baton from President Trump and continued to double, triple down on defense spending. That is what brought the Soviet Union to their knees and their inevitable collapse. Their GDP was 33% of America's. So if we ratchet up our spending, they will not be able to keep up. They will inevitably implode. That strategy had its genesis in the Carter administration. He was proactive. He did outreach. Anybody thought he was accessible. He just seemed like, and he was, a regular person who was trying to give back an appreciation to this republic for what it had given him. That started with his training in the Naval Academy, his military service, his 4 years in the Oval Office, and all the remarkable things he's done as a private citizen, building homes, preaching in a church down in Plains, Georgia. You talk about successful politicians who remain grounded. He is the prototype. From Plains, Georgia, back to Plains, Georgia. And so a remarkable life. The eulogy last night from one of his members of his administration was very powerful. I would submit that anybody who hasn't seen it should log in and hear the eulogy and all of the accomplishments. There is not enough time here to recite all of them. And you will get a Reader's Digest version of what a remarkable and amazing man he was.
All right. Governor, your thoughts?
Well, I think Jim described him very well. You have to keep in mind, in politics, you have a number of different careers, and he certainly did in his entire life. Being president was one 4-year segment of a wonderful career that he had, starting with being raised, in the family house, the family farm, but going to Annapolis, working on nuclear submarines, being part of Rickover's task force and so forth, becoming the governor of Georgia, and then becoming, well beyond anybody's expectations, the President of the United States. When you become an executive, you run into a lot of, I'll use the word hurdles, that you can never plan on. And for him, one of those hurdles was what happened with Iran and the creation of what I would now describe as a theocracy in that country, and has affected the history of the world and of the United States ever since then. and he, that affected his popularity. I think he was more popular before that occurred. But I think he then continued with just not sitting at home on a sofa. He got out there and was involved in the local life and in the county and the state and the country, particularly with his involvement in Habitat for Humanity.
Yeah. Joe, before I throw it to you, I'm going to offer my own thought on this. I was an anchor in Kansas City, Missouri. It was my first full-time anchor job. And I don't know if you realize this or not, but Jimmy Carter would hold news conferences, presidential news conferences, out in the boondocks. He would go to Kansas City. He would go to other cities, and he would hold a nationally televised news conference. And that was the first time I was ever able to ask a question of a sitting president of the United States in one of those situations. And I was the third person to ask the question after the traditional Associated Press got and the UPI used to get it as the first two questions. So, and he was very gracious and answered my question. It did make about the fourth story on the AP line that night as I asked whether he was going to raise Social Security taxes or not, and he basically said, yeah, I think I'm going to have to. And then his administration also, Jody Powell, after the news conference, they had another a situation where you could debrief the Jody Powell, and I think he was his press secretary, and everybody kept being called on. And I kept raising my hand, and finally Jody Powell said, wait a minute, this young man back here, he has a question. I want to hear from him as well. So they were really very good in that administration as to how they treated local press, at least. I'll say that much. But finally, Joe, before I let you give your final thoughts on Jimmy Carter, Jim, you brought up about a eulogy. Sometimes I think family members giving a eulogy can be more insightful than anything. And Jason Carter, the grandson of the president, yesterday had two interesting things. First of all, he said, well, my grandfather was president of the United States for 4 years and governor of Georgia for 4 years. There was another 92 years of his life that we have to talk about, which I thought was very insightful. And he said, and one of those things he talked about was that the Ziploc plastic bags, that he said they'd go into their home and they'd wash those out and then have them out somewhere to dry and reuse them, which of course a lot of people don't bother to do. I'm sorry to take up so much time like that, Joe, but I just thought those were interesting points.
Well, those are great stories, Stacy. I was struck by the changed role that the truth plays in politics and government in our society. As I was watching his funeral yesterday, Jimmy Carter was a truth teller. He, in 1977, he donned a cardigan sweater and went on national television and sort of scolded us all and told us we had to set our thermostats at 65 degrees, which is a little chilly for most people, and that we shouldn't drive over 55 miles per hour, and endorsed a change in the national speed limit. In 1979, he gave something that they call the malaise speech, because even though he never used that word, he was accusing the nation, all of us as Americans, of being in this state of malaise in which we didn't believe in America. We didn't believe in the future of America. And he sort of scolded us again. Now, both times he was telling the truth. It was uncomfortable a little bit. His malaise speech got good reviews at first, but then Ronald Reagan beat him over the head with it when he ran against him and eventually beat him in that election, saying that it was a sign of weakness. But as one of the speakers said yesterday, telling the truth was in his soul. He really didn't have a choice. That's what he had to do because it was part of him. And I think that's refreshing, especially when we look at the truth today and it's the inability really to discern the truth from untruths, from misleading stories, from hate talk, from conspiracy theories. That sort of dominates our public discourse these days. Back then, you told the truth, whether it helped you or hurt you. He actually told the truth when a lie would have served him better politically, but he couldn't help himself, and I miss that.
Well, I also have to bring this up, and maybe we can have a little discussion on it too. He was elected, of course, after the Watergate scandal, and the nation decided that they didn't want Gerald Ford, who was appointed vice president and then became president, to have a full 4 years in the White House. So he was elected after the Watergate scandal, and then was dismissed by the American people 4 years later. And in that 4 year period, as you're talking about, Joe, we had gas crisis, along gas lines that started popping up because OPEC flexed its muscle for the first time. We had the Iran-Contra situation, and this gets to the part of the politics part here. I don't remember any other candidate since 1980 who has been the incumbent who has been challenged like Carter was. I was on the floor of the Democratic National Convention in New York, Madison Square Garden, when Kennedy delivered that unbelievable speech. And if they had been allowed to switch their votes, I think Kennedy would have upset him. So where I'm going with this, Joe, is that it wasn't just Republicans who in the end went against Carter. It was part of his own party as well.
Yeah, I think as the governor pointed out, when you're the chief executive, and he certainly has had this experience as well, you don't know what's going to be thrown at you, and oftentimes there are things that you really have nothing to do with, but that the public will hold you accountable for the very fact that they happened. And I think Jimmy Carter suffered from some of that. The energy crisis, of course, anybody who thinks that presidency of the United States can control the price of gasoline are probably not paying attention. But nonetheless, you wear that if you're in office and gas goes up, and you try to take credit if the price of gas goes down.
Yeah.
Of some things he was able to control, others he was not. But again, like I said, listen, I would remind the listeners and the viewers, watch the eulogy. If you want to see what Jimmy Carter did in 4 years, watch the eulogy. Reagan did hit him over the head with that speech. He did. But Reagan at the same time, and you can read up on that as well, those hostages should have been home in that final year. They weren't. And there's a whole other topic of conversation to talk about there as well. He was a remarkable president. And because of Teddy Kennedy's speech, which the Democrats have learned never to do again, I think that significantly enabled Reagan to win. And then we had union busting, and we had that was Iran-Contra. I think that was Reagan, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, right. Yeah. We had a lot of drama for 8 years. A lot of things he did were good. A lot of things he did were not. Lesson learned. It hasn't happened again. I hope it never does.
Yeah.
I would submit that we've had a lot of drama ever since then.
Yep. Yeah.
That's a good point. Very good point. All right. Gentlemen, thank you for talking about that. Let's move on. As Jimmy Carter was laid to rest, we're just days away now from the beginning of the second term of Donald Trump as president. Governor, the fact that Donald Trump was in the Oval Office and then out of the Oval Office for 4 years, and now he's going back in again, do you, as an executive and serving the governorship, and the presidency is similar to the governorship in a way, do you think this is going to have any effect on how he decides to try to govern?
No. No. I frankly, let's take the normal candidate. The normal candidate going back in would say, okay, I know how the office operates. I know what is supposed to happen. And I can work with that. And there's some things I could do differently than I did the first time. I can tell you myself, if I was going back in the office, there's a couple things I would have done differently. We all have that 20/20 hindsight. This is an unusual candidate. And I think he lives in the moment, not in the past. Now, when I say that is he reacts to what he sees in front of him. I think he has policies, and if you talk to a lot of people on both sides, many people agree with his policies, but his delivery of the policies, delivery of the message, kind of turns people off. Not enough. I mean, he got reelected, so they are expecting things. But I don't think that he is. If he learns from the lessons of the past, I think I would be happy. But he has such a unique personality that I don't know what is going to happen. I wouldn't dare predict it.
I think the governor's right on track. I was talking to Michael Bartley on KDK radio yesterday, and we were talking about the funeral and all the the sort of chess that was being played by past presidents and first ladies, and who was talking to whom, and
Seating.
Obama and Trump were engaged in it. It seemed like some pretty friendly chat, but I don't think this guy will be changed by any of that. Another caller had called in and said, well, maybe he'll see now that, there's this confraternity of presidents. And he doesn't operate that way. He's all about him. And he will, as the governor said, he will respond to the moment, whatever the circumstances are, however it happens to affect them. And, I've given up many years ago thinking that he would grow into the job. He's not going to be a traditional president no matter what happens. He's not going to honor the office in the way other presidents have. He's just going to be himself. And obviously, that's what the voters picked this time. And I always got to go with the voters.
Governor, you're right. I think you're spot on. We cannot, as Americans or on this podcast or anybody having a conversation about this incoming administration, shame on anyone who tries to have a conversation in normal terms about what is going to begin to happen on January 20th. These are not normal times. This is not a run-of-the-mill president. We've seen 4 years of what he's capable of. This is going to be 4 years, and Governor, I do believe he lives in the moment, but he also lives on revenge. This is going to be a 4-year, in the moment, impulsive, spontaneous utterances again and again and again. It's also going to be about who did he think not give him enough respect, who worked against him, and what scores must be settled while I am still here. We cannot talk in normalcy when in the last 2 weeks we're talking about going into or wanting to annex Canada, wanting to annex Greenland, going back and getting the Panama Canal. The rhetoric reminds me of someone about 80 years ago asking for more breathing space. It's not something that you fluff off. It's not something you take lightly. We're going to be having conversations about his impulsive behavior instead of real policy, like a bipartisan immigration bill that he killed before he got into office. If he does good things, that's great. I mean, John Fetterman is going to Mar-a-Lago. He's going to go down and speak to President-elect Trump. That's good. There's the art of politics and the business of government. Those lines have been blurred for many cycles now. Let's get back to the Reagan-Tip O'Neill days. It would be good to see what comes of that, but I don't think Mr. Trump has the capability to stay on point with anything but his self-gratification.
Let me make 2 points, Stacey. Number one point is, if you look at his first cabinet and the individuals he appointed there, many of them career business type people who had a stellar record, who didn't last more than a year, 2 years with him. He's not doing that here in the second term. He's going to more people who seem to accept the way he likes to do things. On the second aspect of it, I know this sounds crazy. I think he likes to stir it up. This conversation about the Panama Canal and about the Gulf of Mexico and about Canada and about Greenland, it's almost like he's throwing a rock in the pond and wants to see the ripples and see everybody react to that. Or maybe off on the side, he's got some other ideas of what he wants to do. And he's just distracting everybody.
Well,
that's all it is.
That could be the case, but I'll put these two things out. The first of which is, I don't know if he's necessarily casting a stone in the water to see the ripples and see how people react, as much as he has, his whole life has been about negotiation. And I'm not a negotiator, but if you throw out that as the top one, and then start the negotiations, you come up perhaps with something else that is likable, and is not as extreme as that. The second part of that that I will say is that there was a time in the history of the United States where it was Seward's Folly, and it was the Louisiana Purchase. This country has in the past, historically, taken some land and done some things and made some deals to enhance its borders at that time. You're already shaking your head, Jim. You're ready to go. Go ahead.
That false equivalence doesn't fly. We're not threatening this man is inkling that he may go into these countries or they're going to do what he wants or he's going to tariff the hell out of them. No, that's a false equivalence that you cannot match to what this man is threatening to do. That's
I think
all
we've made the mistake in the past of giving him too much credit, of thinking that he's thinking, of assuming that he's thought these things through, and of assuming that he has some sort of strategy. I think what we found in his first term was that he's purely motivated by the moment. He's motivated by emotions. He has a keen sense of vengeance, and anyone who gets in his way, he tries to destroy. I think that's really the distinguishing characteristic of this guy. Now, does that mean that he's going to be a terrible president? I can't predict that. Maybe he'll do some good things this term. I don't mind John Fetterman going to visit with him. It's situational politics. This is the guy in charge, and if John Fetterman can get down there and get a better shake for Pennsylvania, I'm all for it. That's the way politics is supposed to work, by the way. We're supposed to work as separate parties, but together for the common good. And if Fetterman can swing that, God bless him. I'm for that. I have my doubts, but
you have to try. The three of us are attorneys, and the analogy I always make in this situation is the politics, the campaign is the argument, the closing argument to the jury. You present the evidence during the campaign like you do at a trial, and you show the jury why you think your argument is preferable to your opponents. And then you put it to the jury for decision on Election Day. The ballot box is the jury deliberation room. You may not like the verdict, but you have to respect it because that's how this democratic republic is drawn up. We've lost our way in that regard, both sides, when it comes to these general elections. Getting back to the basics, like Reagan and O'Neill, Fetterman going down there, the jury spoke. Nobody can say Mr. Fetterman was a Trump supporter. He's not going down there to get slate cards for the GOP. He was all over this state with Kamala Harris. I saw it. He worked as hard for her as he did for his own senatorial campaign. But he's now doing the will of the people of the Commonwealth and of the United States of America. The verdict is in. The jury spoke. He's going to go down there and do what he has to do based on the oath he took to serve this country and this state.
All right.
The GOP Trump could learn from that.
All right. We'll let it go.
Let me make this last observation.
No, go ahead.
He's not running for re-election. What does that do to him? Okay, that really frees him up to do what he wants to do.
I was going to bring that up. Thank you, Governor.
That's scary.
Yeah, he's not running. The other aspect of me, and this is the lawyer in me, and Joe and I, we've talked about this. Let's talk about Greenland for a moment. Why does he want Greenland? Well, it's not a bad idea that we have a good relationship with Greenland and with Denmark. But Denmark owns Greenland, and Denmark is a member of NATO. Why are you upsetting the apple cart there unless he's got some strategy that he wants to be able to base more American forces in Greenland? I'm not necessarily opposed to that idea. With the Panama Canal, we gave it away. He wants it back. They're not going to give it back to us. Could he be trying to set up the situation where they're negotiating better passage for American freight and more difficult passage for Chinese freight? Maybe. That could well be. The whole idea of Canada is the one that totally eludes me. Because, first off, are they going to be one state in an entire country like that? That would become the largest Democrat state in the Union.
We've invaded Canada, I think, 5 times.
And we've been unsuccessful every time.
Every time, right? Canada beats us. Imagine that, right? So you think maybe history could be a guide. In the War of 1812, we got driven back out of Canada, back into the traditional boundaries of the United States. So it's crazy talk. His press conference that he had a few days ago, it was all crazy talk.
Yeah.
He didn't roll out the use of the military. He talked about electric space heaters causing itchiness. All the typical topics that a president would discuss.
Of course.
Yeah.
We didn't get to teach. That's next week.
Let's. That's still taken out of context. I will argue that one with you. Yeah. So.
We switch seats with the governor. We let him moderate. Have a seat. Let's do it.
Yeah. I'm also here because there's not, there are two Democrats and one Republican. So it's one of those situations, which lets me bring you to this one. Okay. Let's see. You've said that you're concerned about his taking reprisals against people and that sort of thing. In his first term, he was impeached twice, and in the period after that, he faced, 4 different criminal cases. And I'm just curious about this. What will be the Democrats' approach down the road here for the next 4 years or 2 years when it comes to President Trump?
Well, lawlessness must be pursued. If he's lawless, then the Democrats should go after that. It's up to him. I mean, he can be a law-abiding citizen like everybody else, but it's his choice.
He crosses the line, he's going to be called out. If he wants to do bipartisan work, he should take a page from Joe Biden, who passed significant bipartisan legislation, other than the immigration bill, which Trump killed, which was bipartisan. So it's really up to him. If he wants to behave illegally and he gets caught, he's going to be called, he's going to get his feet over the fire. So let's be nice to him because he's a president? No. I think, Professor, you nailed it. I will do an injustice if I try to follow up with the way you articulated that point.
Governor.
Well, I mean, my comment is probably that he doesn't even consider this kind of stuff. His thought process is, hey, this is a good idea. I don't know who's talking into his ear, if anybody is talking into his ear. If you recall, and Joe, you're a historian, Caesar had somebody behind him reminding him that his period of time was short.
Glory is fleeting.
Yes, I don't think...
Yeah, reminding him that he is mortal. That's right.
Glory is fleeting.
I don't think there's somebody like that with him. But when it comes to, and particularly the idea of military action, it just demonstrates to me that he needs somebody telling him what you can and cannot do. And I'll take this back to the whole Vietnam War era. And are we allowed to send troops in? We had the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. What can he do without Congress? And if he tries to do, and if he does something and tries to get Congress's approval, the Republicans in the Congress are going to be put in a very difficult situation.
Okay, now you guys have just flipped where I really wanted to talk about this, and this is what the Democrats' approach will be in the next 2 to 4 years. Do the Democrats try to stifle whatever legislation that he might have coming up? Do they? What will be the approach?
The typical legislative process relies upon compromise. No side gets everything that it wants. I think that's a hard pill for Donald Trump to swallow. He thinks he has the power of the presidency and both chambers, and he should be able to get everything he wants. He's going to have problems with his own party. Ask Governor Corbett about that. When your party holds both chambers and the executive branch,
it's harder.
All the legislators think they should get everything they want because they control everything. Well, it's still the art of compromise. And the Democrats, if they can reach a reasonable compromise with Republicans, they should vote together. We saw that in Pennsylvania with the Transportation Act, didn't we, Governor?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's the crown that's the crown jewel of the Corbett administration, the Transportation Act. People will be working for another 20 years on the construction projects that are continuing to flow from that. And that was a Democratic and Republican partnership of sorts led by the governor.
Yeah, that was 2013, wasn't it, Governor?
Yes.
Yeah, I was up there for a Senate Democratic campaign event. We were in the Crown, and we were up on the second floor. I think we've talked about this before, but I was with the Allegheny County Senate caucus, and each one of them was being called to the principal's office by you to have a conversation about getting that bill done. You were whipping votes like an executive was supposed to do from both sides of the aisle. It's historic for what it did for this Commonwealth, what it continues to do, and it is a lesson for political science classrooms to see how bipartisanship is supposed to work. When the top executive in one of the biggest states in America is reaching both sides of the aisle to do what's in the best interests of the institution. It is a textbook example of leadership. And
You
it
know,
was
Stacey, we
commendable
were a
to
little
watch.
concerned at one point that the governor was living under the Liberty Bridge because they had repeated press conferences announcing various stages of this legislative package. That is, as Jim said, that's a textbook example of how this is supposed to work. And if Donald Trump wants to work it that way, then I think he'll find
But
Democratic.
will the Democrats work it that way?
Stacey,
Well,
yes,
sure,
yes.
sure.
You've asked that 3 times. Yes, yes, yes. But
Thank
it
you.
depends. Wait, it depends on what's on the table. And Mr. Trump should take a lesson from Joe Biden, who was able to get Republicans to work with him. So yeah, they will if it's the right thing. They're not going to be spiteful like Mitch McConnell killing things or Donald Trump killing an immigration bill. That's not how we work. We respect the business of government. It's not about the art of politics. Case in point, John Fetterman going to Mar-a-Lago. Yes,
Right.
yes, yes.
All right. Yes. Yes.
Can
Thank
I
you.
add in, though, that there's a different perspective that I have. And we can't speak for the Democrats. I can't speak for the Republicans. Because there are now significant factions in there. The faction that I had was called the Tea Party faction, was to the far right. Okay? Now that is the MAGA faction. You have the progressive faction that's in the Democratic Party right now. So each party, I think, now has a difficult time reaching a consensus into which they can agree and try to reach a compromise with an individual that thinks because he's the chief executive, he gets everything he wants.
Okay, good. We'll end it with that. And I've got some other comments, but I don't want to elongate this thing any longer than it is. So I'll let it go. We'll continue our look at politics after the election, or after the swearing in of Donald Trump for a second term, with some analysis of that. Again, if you're watching or listening to this program, podcast, I urge you to hit the subscribe or the like button. And for right now, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again after the inauguration. Thanks for joining us. Bye.